more relaxed in the way that we try to get into the mood of the conference. So we have a combination of more technical, and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow will be only conference, like trying to be sort of every 50 minutes, 30 minutes switching. And we have also some short presentation, as we had a very good number of good presentation, a high number of good presentation. We try to fit in as many as possible. To cut it short, Henning, it's probably one of the very old by now active contributors in Kamailio project, maybe 2005, 6 or so. I'm not sure, but it's in terms of contribution one of the very active and high number of like commits and so on. He worked previously for 1&1, one of large deployments using Kamailio. They have also here a big team. They do presentation from time to time. And now he's presenting you a tutorial on what Kamailio offers from the point of view of security. Henning, thanks for coming and also helping with the project for so many years. And let's see it. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Thank you again, Daniel. Great to be here to the 7th edition of Kamailio World. Yeah, just a quick overview about the agenda. As Daniel mentioned, this is a bit more technical talk. I mean, it's difficult, of course, to do a workshop like with so many people, but I make sure that I put in a lot of configuration items, some technical details, about security. We'll start a bit with the basics. And this may sound a bit trivial for like security professionals. We have also like security guys here, which will later present about RTC hacking, I think. But nevertheless, I see it again and again at customer sites that the basics are missing. And then some sections about like, how to check if your zip messages are valid, some denial of service protection guidelines, general malicious behavior detection, and some hints how to improve your user authentication over the stock Kamailio config that is delivered from us, from the project. And I will close with some notes from the field, just to give you some feedback about the past experience that we have. And if you have, of course, some experiences in your deployments, I'm also interested to hear it. I will make sure that we have some time to discuss at the end. If there are questions, as I said, there will be plenty of time in the end for questions and discussions. Yeah, as Daniel said, actually I started in 2007 with the Kamailio project. I'm since then more or less a core developer of the Kamailio project, a big contributor to the project in many different areas. In databases, this was one of the first areas where I worked, but also the core, many different other modules, some general code quality topics, security testing in the last years, quality assurance, administration. Security testing, as I mentioned, last year I presented about the Kamailio fuzzing project. This project is still running. Thanks for Fred for sponsoring the server here. I found also some interesting issues with this project again this year, but I will come later to that as well. Yeah, I started last year also a company to do some consulting in voice over IP. I do some workshops, trainings, of course, normal custom development services, the usual stuff, I would say, to my customers. Yeah, as you know, security is always a trade-off. You need to rate it against your different criteria. So on one hand, you have the costs. I mean, if you implement additional security measures, first of all, it costs money. Just by implementing it, you spend your time, you spend time as a service provider. You need to pay it if you buy it from a commercial vendor. And of course, these complexities that you introduce also makes your maintenance more costly. by features. Also more things can happen if you have more features, if your setup is complexer. It's more complex. Then, of course, you need to weight it against the risk that you actually face. If your Kamailio is in the open internet, then it's, of course, much more dangerous, so to say, if you are in a private setup, maybe with a commercial session border controller. I'm not saying that the session border controller is more secure, might be not, but in the end, you don't need to worry about Kamailio that much. And there are customers that are still running OpenSea 1.5 or 2 or 3 something in their setups. And as long as this is not in the open internet, they don't experience many issues. We don't recommend it, of course, but people do that. And then, of course, you need to weight it against like the user experience. User experience depends, of course, if you are like a big company like 1&1 sitting over there, which provides services to millions of customers. You need to really make sure that your devices are still working, that you don't break any devices, that your customer support don't get too much issues. Yeah. So in this triangle, you need to move, and you need to find your proper position, basically, what to implement, what kind of security do you implement, what is okay for your setup. And this, of course, changes over time. I mean, I live in Stuttgart, and Stuttgart, like one of the car centers in Germany. And since half a year, there's a lot of security issues going on. Companies are hacked, companies are blackmailed. And so therefore, there's a lot of focus on security right now for these companies. Maybe in 2 years, when less happens, this will change. So it's really like a moving target, so to say, for the risk, of course. Yeah. Okay. About the basics. Yeah. I know, as I said, this sounds trivial, but if you have a system that's run a productive service, especially if it's running in the internet, you need to keep your system up to date. Use a supported operating system, apply the updates that you have at least monthly. I still visit customers which somehow don't do this. This is something that I not recommend, of course. Then you should protect your system. Kamailio is just one service that's running on the server, of course, and it makes no sense if Kamailio is hyper secure and somebody can log in with a weak SSH login, for example. Or if your MySQL or Redis database or whatever database you are using is listening on a public internet and is available with a weak password, with a known password. You all know these databases that are hacked. MongoDB is one of the most famous, I think, but also in the cloud environments, frequently you get these reports that databases or other data is hacked or is accessed because of weak passwords. Yeah. If you use databases, bind them to the local host, of course, or like to a private network. If you can bind Kamailio only to a private network, or like if you have asterisk server or FreeSwitch server behind the Kamailio, make sure that they also only are bind and listening to the private network if this is okay from an RTP point of view. If you provide SSH access to the outside, use something like fail to ban. Fail to ban is a basic tool in the toolbox of a system administrator, I would say. You can also use this, I will show later, for other stuff to combine this with Kamailio. If the system is up to date, then of course also you need to keep Kamailio up to date. The last stable releases are supported. At the moment, this is 5.1 and 5.2. We announce the end of maintenance on the mailing lists every 1-2 months, depending on the amount of bugs that are found. We will also provide a minor release which can be installed, which really less effort, and this is compatible from a database point of view, also from a configuration point of view. You can really install it rather easily. Okay. Good. Security by obscurity. There are, of course, different opinions on this. This is, of course, not good to have this as only security, measurement as only security piece in your toolbox, but nevertheless it can be useful against unskilled attackers, the typical script kiddies. For example, you can move your SSH port or your Kamailio port if it's just a test server to a not well-known port. You don't need to publish all your internal machines in the DNS, for example. You can just hide some information about your setup. If you have the Kamailio server in the open internet, you can also configure Kamailio in a way that it don't give the complete version number to the outside. By default, Kamailio gives the complete version number. Kamailio 5.1.2 running on Linux. You can configure it, or you can also suppress it completely. This is done with the server header here. If you are using, for example, the option modules to ping other infrastructure, or Kamailio, or you use other modules that ping infrastructure, then Kamailio will use the user agent header. And here also you can specify user agents that don't give that many options. Important if you run the Kamailio in a production setting that you disable the debug feedback. This is with the zip_warning parameters. By default, Kamailio will give so-called noisy feedback about its PID, about some ports, about the ingoing and outgoing request URI, source IP, etc. This is not something that you want to have, of course, in the open internet, that everybody can get this feedback from you. You should disable it. If you have internal network detail, if you have an internal network, or if you transfer your traffic to maybe PSTN gateways or PSTN carriers, you can use the topology hiding module to hide these network details. The topology hiding module is it was introduced in 3-point-something release. It's rather old. It works completely transparent. You just load it to the Kamailio. You give him a few configuration parameters, and then it will transparently rewrite incoming and outgoing messages to hide your network details. Network details, for example, in the via or in the contact headers, will be changed so that the outside can't really see this. You can use the topology hiding module in 2 modes, so to say. One is one mode is that you can store the information in a header as a special parameter. If you do this, make sure that you choose a proper random key that is used to encrypt this data in the headers. It's not a really strong encryption, but nevertheless, you should do it. You can also use dialog, the dialog module, to store this data in a database, more or less, also in the memory, but most cases in the database. This is a bit more secure because the data is then removed completely from the headers. As I said, if you use the topology hiding module, make sure that you configure it with a proper random key. You need to give the module a random but unused IP address. This is used, for example, in the contact headers then. And you also should configure it that it masks the caller ID. I found with my security fuzzing project, I found also some issues, some bugs in the topology hiding module. Some months ago, they are now fixed. Since some time, there will be an announcement pretty soon, I think, about these bugs. So if you use the topology hiding module, make sure that you also enable these sanity checks. Sanity is a second module which is really useful to check against wrong messages or also some attacks in messages. And the topology hiding module can use this sanity API to do checks also on the message that it's received. This is for normal requests, and this is for the URIs for the special parts in the message. If you already use fail to ban, you can also use it to add some protection to Kamailio. This is some example how to configure it. First, you need to configure a filter. Depending on the distribution, on Debian, it's probably in filter.d. In Fedora, Red Hat, maybe a different location. Just have a look to the documentation here. You need to define a filter. This is basically an expression which is applied to a log stream, to a log message. In this case, blocking traffic from an IP address or from a host name. In this case, an IP address. Then you need to configure this filter in the fail to ban configuration, include it, how many retries and how much time the entries should be banned. This is, of course, something you should decide depending on your local environment, on your local policy. And then, in this case, you need to put it all together. You need to, of course, then log the proper line in Kamailio that it's then read later from fail to ban. This is something you can use, for example, for errors in authentication. Maybe you're having user agents that are not behaving correctly. Maybe that they're sending every second some strange requests. Maybe they're sending a lot of subscribes that you don't want. In Kamailio, you're really flexible. You can do whatever you want. In the end, you can use this then also to really block this on an IP level, in the IP tables firewall. Configure the proper Kamailio log path, of course. Then it should work rather straightforward. If you are using something like this, of course, you need to make sure that you are not blocking by mistake maybe some of your trusted gateways, and you also exclude your local IPs. Otherwise, an attacker can maybe spoof some traffic and can block your machines. This is not something that you want, of course. I already mentioned the sanity module. You can also use the sanity module as a standalone check on all messages. This is also something that is done in the default configuration. I highly recommend to do this. You just call it with sanity check. This number here is just basically a bit flag. Have a look to the documentation to see the meanings of the different flags. But basically what you can do is check for different parts of the message that the message is well formed. And this part, the 7 here, this is the UI checks, the UI checks. Again, a bit flag. Also here, have a look to the documentation. This is from the default configuration. And of course, you need to adapt to your local policy. Do you want to silently drop it? Some people prefer this. Or do you want to send back a stateless error message? Something like this. Another thing which can be highly useful if you tune it to your situation, if you scan for certain user agents, this is something which can be done with the just with the configuration expression. With the later on, I will also show another module that you can use to filter for user agent. And as I said, you need to adapt it to your policy. Drop it silently, or send it to not OK maybe, or like a 403 or something like this. If you use modules that are doing some queries on the database side, maybe the authentication module or the authentication DB module, maybe SQL, some SQL scripts that you call from the configuration with SQL ops. With a statement like this, of course, you need to check that it really fits to your setup. You can check against SQL injections. Again, here, decide if you just want to drop it or want to reply an error. Additional to your firewalling that you, of course, also do on the server, you should also check in the Kamailio for the IPs that contact you if you have setup where everybody can contact you on the network, on the open internet. This is of course limited that you can do, but if you are more closed setup, then you can really restrict the messages that can reach your Kamailio. There are, again, many ways how to do it. You can use a permissions module. You can just query a database with SQL ops. You can, if you have a small number of IP addresses, you can just put it in the configuration file. If you combine it with a define, for example, then it's also rather easy to change it from a production to a testing environment. And you should also check against spoofing attacks. In this case here, an example, how to check a record route. You should compare the incoming IP addresses with the record route, a contact, or via header. In this case, just an example. You take the record route, the URI, and compare it to the incoming source address. This, of course, only works if Kamailio is the first hop that your customers reach. If you have maybe some other network infrastructure, like a session border controller there, then this will not work, of course. You will get always the address of the session border controller. In this case, what many people do is that they put the incoming source IP in a special header field on the session border controller and then have a look to that in Kamailio later on. Good. Okay. About denial of service and infrastructure protection. Kamailio has a built-in blacklist support. It's rather easy to activate. You just say in the configuration, use destination blacklist on, and then Kamailio will stop sending out messages or requests to destinations that failed before. There's an extensive configuration with 4 or 5 parameters. Have a look to the cookbook. No, there's also how to in the Kamailio repository, how to configure it. One important thing that you need to consider is how fast Kamailio should recycle the entries that it puts into the blacklist. But again, you find everything here. If you look for this use destination blacklist functionality, you find everything in the core cookbook as well. If you have a larger infrastructure, which customers that might be on the open internet, I would suggest that you have a look to the rate limit module, especially if you have more sensitive infrastructure behind Kamailio, like an Asterisk server or maybe a media server, a gateway, proprietary solution. Rate limit can act as a basic safeguard to prevent that your infrastructure behind Kamailio gets overloaded. Kamailio, as you know, it's really high performant. It has a high performance. It will route every message with many hundreds of megabits without any issues on nowadays server, but the application server behind Kamailio might not be able to support this. So use rate limit. In this case, this is an example for a really simple configuration. We just configure a queue which match to everything. This is the star here. We give this queue a special algorithm, in this case tail drops. This is the most simple one. There are more advanced algorithms in the module, but this is the most simple one. And with the limit of 200 per timer interval is default 10 seconds. And then you just apply a check, and if the check returns true, if the check returns false, then you will just append a reply here. We try after, for example, in 5 or 10 or 60 seconds, and send the reply out. If you do something like this is something the guys from 1&1 of course know. You should consider to randomize the retry after, because if you have a network outage and maybe 100,000 clients just fall out from the network and then they come back in 1 second, this will of course will lead to a synchronization, and your lines will come every 5, 10, 60 seconds back and will again, will run into this limit. So consider add a random interval here. This is that you can do with the config utils. You can get a random number there. There are other ways to do it. You can also use the user log and register module to do some randomization there. This is important to prevent synchronization. This is really one of the weaknesses of this algorithm, that you get a synchronization here. Okay, so far for the basic rate limiting, protecting your infrastructure. I'm sorry. You should also use the Pike module to for an IP-based blocking of incoming requests. If you look to the Kamailio default configuration, this is rather well known to you. I will just explain it briefly. Basically, how does it work? It combines the Pike module with the hash table. You just set up a hash table called IP-ban. After 300 seconds, all entries are expired there, or insert entries are expired there. And then you check if it's already in the IP-ban table, then you just drop the request silently. Or if it's not there, you check with Pike. And if it's Pike found a blocking, Pike want to block it more or less, then you insert it into the hash table that is later then detected. How does the Pike module work? The Pike module works, it doesn't look to one individual IP, it looks to subnets, to a subnet. So if you have like a denial of service or an attack, which is coming from different IP in one subnet, the whole subnet will be, or like the different IP in the subnet will be blacklisted. And if there are new IPs that come from this blacklist, from this subnet, they will be also blacklisted faster. So it has some kind of intelligence that it combines the different IPs into subnets, into a subnet. There's also documentation in the module. I can maybe I can quickly have a look to it where I have it here. 1 second. Oh my God, sorry. Need to find my mouse, I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, so as I said, it will just build a tree of the IP addresses, and like if it finds some hits here, and then it will faster, for example, block this IP address. So step by step, it builds really a subnet tree, and then subsequent IP addresses are blacklisted then faster than if they are coming from a new network. Okay. So rate limit, Pike, these are typical tools to protect against like fast attackers, maybe some denial of service. Slow attacks are of course harder to detect because you don't want to block your valid users. But again, you can use some functionality in Kamailio to protect against slow password brute forcing as well. This is an example. I think it was developed from Daniel after an attack, a scanning attack. How does it work? Again, we have a hash table, 920 seconds to give some room here for the limit of 900 seconds here. And what this logic does, it will just count. Well, it will check if there's a user that gave a wrong password 3 times, then it will be blocked for 900 seconds. This is basically it. We have a look if there's a header field. So is this a valid request which belongs to an authorization? We will check if there was already an authentication request. If there was one, then it will also reply 4 or 3, so that the user agent can try it later. It's a lot of code. Here we fill the hash table. What we are doing here, basically, we challenging, or we call in the www authenticate function, and then looking to the return code of this function. If we get a -1, we will just reply it with 403. I think 1 is a generic error. If we get a -2, this means wrong password. Then we will update the hash table here. We'll also log something in Kamailio log, and we'll set the hash table to the timestamp. $TS is the timestamp here. Of course, if the user authenticated successfully, we need to reset the hash table here. And of course, if we get requests without authorization header, we just need to challenge it. So far, this is just normal Kamailio configuration logic here. Okay. I know it's a lot of code, a lot of Kamailio code. One common scenario that you want to use in your setup is that you want to limit parallel calls. Kamailio, as you all know, it doesn't care about media, just care about zip. So it doesn't matter to Kamailio if a user set up 1 session, 100 sessions, 1,000 sessions. But of course, on the user bill, on your bill in the end, this matters a lot. So it makes sense for example, to use a dialog module to limit the number of concurrent calls. Maybe you also want to use this functionality to do some product differentiation. Maybe you have a light product with just 1 parallel call, maybe a more professional product with 3, 4, 5 parallel calls. This is something that you can do with a dialog module. How does it work? You need to configure it, that the dialog uses dialog profiles. This is a functionality that you can put some data in a dialog. You need to just check if the dialog already was looked to it more or less, and if you have a look into the dialog profile, and in this case here, if the number of concurrent calls is larger than 5, then you just block the call, basically. And if this is not the case, the user has less than 5 concurrent calls, you set the proper flag here, and you will update the profile in the dialog module. Keep in mind, if you implement something like this, this works out of the box only for 1 Kamailio, because Kamailio is a module which is running on 1 server. If you want to implement it on a cluster of servers, there's functionality it's called remote dialog profiles. You can implement some custom protocol to synchronize here the dialog profiles from server to server. You can store it basically also in a database, of course. It's not the most performant, most fast option, but it works. Some people do this. You can, of course, also use another database, no SQL database, something like this. Just keep in mind that this code only works on 1 machine, on 1 server. To block other parts in the server, in the Kamailio, other parts depending on the message content, for example. There are many more modules that offer some kind of blacklisting functionality. Nowadays, most of this functionality can also implement it with SQLOps and/or hash table. Many of these modules are just some more or less advanced interface to a database. Sometimes with caching support that you don't need to hit for every request the database, but sometimes just as a database request. For example, the user blacklist module has two functions. Has more functions, but I just explained two functions. One is check user blacklist. This will just check against the database. This is something you can use. It's it provides this functionality, but in the end, you can also just use SQLOps. You need to make sure, of course, that you escape properly the data that you put to the database, stuff like this. But there is, of course, a need, or there is, of course, a use case in providing this function. You can use it. And check blacklist, another function in the user blacklist module. This checks again a global list with some caching in memory, which is, of course, more faster. There's a new addition in the current development version of Kamailio. There's a module called SecFilter, security filter. It has a lot of functionality. It provides a lot of functionality. For example, you can check for user agents. You can check for countries together with the GeoRP module. For example, you have Kamailio sitting in the internet. You only want to provide services for customers in Germany or in the US, but not for customers in Africa. I don't know. Just use your imagination here. Have a look to the module documentation here. You will get more ideas. In the Kamailio wiki, there's also a nice documentation, security tutorial, where you find also a lot of these SecFilter examples, which were recently added from the module author, I think. Okay. If you provide a Kamailio service on a private or public net, you will, of course, use authentication in most cases, at least. If you have user agents in the field, they need to authenticate in one form or the other against your server. Unfortunately, the standard zip authentication is still using MD5 as a hashing algorithm. And as you all know, MD5 is really it's broken since a long time, since, I don't know how many years, a long time. HTTP is already more advanced. It already includes, since some years, SHA-256 and SHA-512 digests. This is more secure. There's a draft from IETF, this name, which has the goal to update the zip authentication standard, also use SHA-256. I hope this gets a real internet standard soon. Happily, we already support SHA-256 in the authentication module since, I don't know, maybe 10 years. So this was already implemented. You can already use it. So I would suggest give it a try with a user agent. If you have contact with the user agent vendor, frequently discuss with them if they support newer hash algorithms, because MD5 is really, as I said, is really broken, as you all know. What you can do out of the box in Kamailio is that you can configure the authentication module more secure. You need to activate basically a functionality in the authentication module, and the standard is called QOP, quality of protection. Kamailio support out and out int. This is something you need to enable. Then your authentication protocol will be upgraded to a more secure way, more secure working. You should configure the nonce expiration to a shorter time interval. If you are familiar with the protocol, the server gives the client a nonce. Nonce is number used just once. Number that should be used once it will send it to the client, and here we configure it that the nonce should expire after 60 seconds. This should be a short interval to prevent reply attacks. You should configure a short nonce drift. Should not configure it too short. If your servers are not running on the same time, for example, then you will get issues here. This section here, this is something you really need to make sure that it works on your setup. This section also only works if you enable this parameter here, calculate HA1. What does this parameter do? This means that the Kamailio server should calculate the hashes from a clear text password. And again, as I mentioned earlier, this is a trade-off here. If you want to use this functionality, you need to store your passwords in clear text in a database, which is, of course, not a good thing nowadays. Yeah. So it's hard to recommend, I would say, in a production setting. Yeah. Unfortunately, the protocol is designed in a way that it makes it really, really hard to makes it properly secure. So the following sections are just to include the nonces and to make it more secure, to include some parts of the zip message basically in the nonce parameters. Okay. Good. Okay, so if you are changing something, of course you need to make sure that you don't change too many things at once. It's just standard operating practice. You should also keep track of your changes. Use some configuration management system. Use a Git repository. You can also use whatever repository you want, but use a repository. As I said, don't forget about the basics. It's not enough if Kamailio is secure. Your system also needs to be up to date. You should protect your system and also update Kamailio from time to time, especially if it's running in an open internet. If you add some security checks, you should really add some logging information that you see in a log file that the check is triggered. This is also useful if you have like a dedicated operating team that they have a look here, can have a look at what's going on. And of course, keep in mind that certain user agents might not behave correctly. You really need to make sure that it's working correctly, that you don't block your valid users, basically. Okay, so that's all from my side. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Henning.